on air. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to our scheduled update with myself and Jacob. As you know, we started this last week. If you haven't gone and seen that inaugural stream, that inaugural conversation, then do so. It was a doozy. But we're back again for another breakdown of some of the latest developments this week, the past week. And Jacob was enlightening me to something that I'd missed the details of. I'd heard of an incident, but I hadn't heard the gravity of it. I think it's because I've been caught up with some events in the Middle East. But Jacob, so apparently the Russians may have been involved in an attempted drone strike targeting on Leipzig airport. Break it down for us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that you hadn't heard more about it is also quite shocking to me, and it's been underreported in European media. But the reason why I've been lambasting media here in Denmark is because this attack, if it had been successful, it would be, most likely deadly in a really bad way, because you have a proven drone loaded with 800 grams of Semtex explosives. And just nearby, there was a Ukrainian freight plane that was loaded with ammo, basically. And it would have caused a massive explosion. Semtex and ammo is a very unhealthy combination.
Yeah, as I commented just now before we came live, I've played enough video games to know what the combination of ammo piles and Semtex can mean. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, that's insane. Germany does seem to have been, like Denmark, the sort of the Nordic, the northern, should we say, Central European states, if that makes sense, like the Benelux countries, have been somewhere that we've seen more recent interference from Russia in these ways. I think it was back in August of last year, September, when there was quite a purposeful probing by Moscow. It seems to be, I don't know, Jacob, if there's a pattern here, but to me, Russia seems to have specific methods of testing the boundaries of NATO, depending upon where they are. So with the UK, it's maritime. With the Estonians or the Baltic states, it's aerial. Romania, it's drone. And here it seems more like it's with Poland, Germany, Denmark, Belgium. It seems to be more sort of on the ground, like hidden explosive devices, if that makes sense. Is that a pattern, or is it not really any correlation?
I think in the case of Germany, probably Belgium, it most likely is. In Denmark, no. In Denmark, what we've seen, the incidents are most likely launched from Shadow Fleet ships. I mean, we know there's Russian soldiers, ex-special forces stationed on board Shadow Fleet vessels. They have been identified. We've seen that Russian Shadow Fleet ships carry weapons, etc. So I think that is more or less the pattern we've seen around Denmark. But the country that has been hit the most by these so-called hybrid attacks, I'll tell you afterwards why I don't like that term, but that is Germany, actually. That is Germany. And when I look at it, it's most likely for me due to two factors. One, that politically in Germany, you have a very strong right-wing radical party. You have quite a strong left-wing radical party that are opposed to Ukraine aid, etc., etc., and the right of center and the left of center that are trying to carry the government really have to navigate these two poles on the left and the right. And the Russians are really trying to, deepen those divisions and play on them. So I think the Russians there are looking for political effect, and that is one reason why probably a country, my own Denmark, hasn't been targeted a whole lot, because except for the right wing radical party, we don't really have anyone that oppose Ukraine aid, etc., etc. And our political system is quite solid that way. And then also in Germany, it's probably easier for the Russians to operate. And now that we're going back to the Leipzig airport incident, this is not the first time we've seen a serious incident at the Leipzig airport. Back in 2024, there was an incendiary a bomb that went off in a DHL plane, and this DHL plane fortunately had been delayed because the bomb was set to go off while it was midair on its way from Germany to Birmingham, from Leipzig to Birmingham. So I mean, that could have also been a deadly incident. Now, what more do we know about the Leipzig airport? Two things, super important. The first thing, it is a very important hub for NATO airlift. They have a hub at the Leipzig airport to do airlifts around Central and Eastern Europe up to the Baltics, centered around Leipzig airport. Then it's also a hub for Ukraine and shipments of ammunition and weaponry to Ukraine. And the second thing that is super interesting about Leipzig airport is the fact that it has been the center of a big espionage case, where actually a party member of the Alternative für Deutschland, the right-wing radical party in Germany, has been convicted of conducting espionage around the airport, and with connections to China. Now, there's been a Chinese spy ring with an employee at the Leipzig airport. And the German AfD member that used to be a member of the European Parliament is actually also charged in connection with these China relations, and he's actually now a member of the Bundestag in Germany, which
Right.
makes it super spicy. So, I mean, very shadowy activities have been going on around Leipzig airport, and it seems that this interest in mapping flight schedules, etc., etc.,
Yeah.
perhaps have gone to China and then on to Russia somehow. It
Yeah.
could be. It could be. We don't know yet.
Well, I mean, look, you said a lot, so allow me a moment to
Sorry
pick
about
apart.
that.
No, no, no. I
Sorry.
just no. It shows the depth and breadth of your knowledge. It's more just you've got so many things you said that I want to sort of add on as well. I mean, look. Firstly, on the China front, I think it's pretty clear the amount of integration these two have. The Chinese are belligerently neutral, right? It's like the United States during the Falklands or the Second World War before they entered, right? They said they were neutral, but they had a favoritism towards the British in supplying them arms and munitions. It's the non-lethal aid the Chinese provide, or as we seem to be seeing, increasingly lethal aid in the frame of these over-the-shoulder launches they've been providing to Iran in the past few weeks. So the Chinese are definitely incrementally growing, and there was a good piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago about how the US is using up all its munitions. And that's for the Chinese and the Russians to take note of, especially Beijing. Although I'm skeptical about a Taiwan operation for a while now. I think we're off from that. But that aside, I mean, on Germany, yeah, I mean, look, I think we've been seeing this for a long time. You know better than I do. But the Germans have been very much on a defensive under Olaf Scholz. Those things very defensive. We'll give you 50,000 helmets. Okay, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Berlin. That's from Ukraine, right?
That improved, fortunately. That improved.
No, of course no. I'm just saying that's where we started, and that under Frederick Merz and shifts in government policy, concerns of the AfD alignment. It's been shifts in policy for sure. But I think that Germany offers a hub also because the more that the economy reindustrializes or whatever, remilitarizes, the loosening up of spending deficits and things for military equipment and things. That's obviously going to be a concern for Moscow, Washington perhaps as well. But I did want to do one thing, which was actually you were talking about the different types of attacks, and you don't like hybrid warfare, and I understand why. So sort of what some people call is disruption or interference. So ignore that bit, everyone. Ignore the hybrid warfare over there for a second. But I think this map is very, very good. Okay, I know it's a year old, but it shows you not only the types of sabotage. There's another map I'm going to show in just a second, but it shows you the type of attacks, on communication infrastructure, government, undersea water cables, transport, military infrastructure. And this, I think, really reinforces what you just said, Jacob, because look at the quantity of focus on Germany there. Obviously, the whole of Europe has been hit, but Germany very much with likely confidence in types of things like spying on aerial vehicles, vandalism, pretty insane stuff. But the other one I wanted to show you, which I think is even better, is this one from Eurasia Group. So this does a pretty good job, I think, of demonstrating the diversity of Russia's meddling, shall we call it. So you've got a lot of cyber, you've got a lot of political interference. But what I think, to your point about Germany, is I think it's Germany, Poland have been particularly recipient of sabotage type attacks. So this sort of thing that we've seen with the railway in Poland, was it 6-7 months ago? And a couple of other things in and around Czechia. So it's this sort of how to say, like, arsenal of options that Moscow has, which I is that's what's so challenging for NATO and allies to know how to deal with. I don't know,
definitely. And if you look at the trajectory, it's just going upwards. When you start at 2022, and then it's just going in the wrong direction. And one of my things that I've been debating here in Denmark for a couple of years now is the fact that these attacks, and I call it shadow war, get more and more risky and more lethal. The potential lethality of this planned attack or this attempted attack in the Leipzig airport, it could have had disastrous consequences. And that, you would not be able to call that a hybrid attack had it succeeded. It would clearly be an act of war. So it's breaking new ground, and I think for me it's important. And the reason why I'm very concerned that we don't debate it enough is the fact that Russia intensifies these attacks, and they get more and more risky and potentially more and more lethal, because Russia always pushes the boundaries. And by NATO, you could argue the Europeans not reacting and not having any, firm response towards this, Russia will continue to push the boundaries. That is how I see Russia, and that's how I interpret the data that we have.
No, I mean, that's precisely sort of where I was going to go with this a little bit, which is I remember doing a video, an analysis late last year, which was very popular. I think it was one of the best performing at the time. And I was just emphasizing the real I think I just even called it the real reason Putin is provoking NATO. For me, it's quite simple. I think for a lot of people who don't read into this often, it doesn't necessarily make sense. But to your point, it's getting more shameless, more blatant, more frequent, and more intense, I think. Both the volume and magnitude of these probes, incursions, whatever, are
shadow war.
Whether shadow war, yeah, I mean, you could call it a shadow war, I guess. But the question therefore becomes, and I remember reading one article back in like 2015, 16, which was simply taught at that point, which was identify, to call them out, publicly shame them. Europe doesn't have a great habit of doing, but we seem to have gone further than that. And so what I'm trying to get at is here for you is how does NATO respond to this? Because it always seems to be we condemn. Oh, great. Okay, some more heavy-handed work.
But we don't even do that. We don't even do that. The first and most obvious thing would be to call it out as an Article 4 situation, which is a threat to member states' security, and show that NATO stands united and will go up against this as one. And when we don't do that, Putin and the Kremlin perceive us as weak. They perceive us as scared. They perceive us as divided. And I can only think of one issue where we really, really signaled, unity in terms of going up against it. Those are all the cable cuttings that have occurred up here in the Baltics, which were very frequent and happening all the time until a ship was boarded by the Finns, and a NATO operation was launched in the Baltic Sea to deter the Russians, and then we saw a decrease in those operations. Now we've also launched NATO operations due to the drone incursions, and that might have had some effect. We can't say what would have happened if we hadn't launched that, but we're always being challenged. And we also need to look at, how can we show the Russians that it has a concrete impact on them when they do it, and that we don't let them do it for free. So we have to have an inventory of reactions that we can activate, and deepen sanctions, increased support for Ukraine, whatever, to show the Russians, well, you get to pay for this.
Well, that makes me think of when I made this video about 6-7 months ago. The point I simply made was we just shoot it down, right? The argument people have been making is if Russia, if Moscow incurs on the sovereign space, on the aerial territory of another plane, of another country, excuse me. Sorry, I'm thinking of what I was going to say. Just look it out of the sky. No, I was trying to look it up. It's this. Basically, Turkey shot the Russian jet out of the sky. And what did it do? Nothing. Ironically, the Russians condemned the action, not the other way around. So the argument amongst some more hawkish people is simply, if Russia does it, we shoot it out of the sky. And what are they going to do? Send more jets into the sovereign space? Because it's still in a defensive act, right? If it's over Estonian airspace, the Russians can't arguably say that was an act of aggression, because why were you in their sovereign space in the first place?
No, exactly.
That's the argument some people said, but I don't know if you agree with that. Is that a risky?
Oh, well, I certainly agree. I certainly agree. The less we do, the more we get challenged, and and just by showing that we're afraid of shooting down drones and planes, etc., that violate, because the Russians know what they're doing. These are not accidents. These are not random acts. It's done, calculated, and purpose with a purpose, and that's what we need to understand, that it will keep going. I will also say, the fact that even when we look at Ukraine, one of the key problems is we don't even support Ukraine in terms of international law. We could have contributed to shooting down drones and missiles over Ukraine long ago. It's fully permitted as a defensive act and as a legit support for the self-defense of a country that is under attack. And guess what? When I was in Ukraine in April of 2024, right when I was on the train heading to Kiev, the Iranians had their first attempt to strike Israel with drones and missiles. And who shut them down besides Israel? The US, the UK, France, Jordan, Saudi Arabia all contributed to defusing that attack and to shooting down drones and missiles. And did that make them, get them into a war with Iran? No, because it's legitimate to do. And we've just signaled to the Russians that you're good to go in Ukraine. And to me, that's a huge problem. And we should have stepped up already back in 2022 to actually stop it, because it only gets worse. And you're seeing the impact now in Kiev, only last week with the 24 ballistic missiles striking Kiev out of 24 that were launched. So it's a big
Yeah,
problem.
to be contrarian on that point, though, people who
That's
are
fair.
to be contrarian for the sake of the argument, not to say necessarily true, is that's what some people need to. You're critically analysing the argument. Is simply people will say that Ukraine is not a member of NATO, therefore it's not under NATO's jurisdiction to defend Ukraine. What would your response?
Israel isn't part of NATO either. And last time I looked, Israel didn't have a defense agreement with Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the UK and France, for instance. It's just funny that we accept it in Europe, something that we clearly don't accept in the Middle East.
But isn't that a distinction between nation states acting bilaterally, unilaterally for the sake of another nation versus under the auspices of NATO? Because some people, in the context of Russia, people will claim that those countries are acting under the auspices of NATO, and it's the NATO alliance which is acting, versus they're conveniently the Middle East. It's like, no, they were just acting independently for themselves.
Yeah, but again, I mean, you could do this in Ukraine as well, and regardless, it's international law, and it's just turning up at the UN Security Council and say we don't stand for it, and we are helping Ukraine because you're striking civilian targets, obviously. So we'll help the Ukrainians shoot whatever you throw at them down. And if Putin then sees that as a wider war, it's we need to be clear that it's basically his problem, because international law is international law. I have a very strong feeling that Putin wouldn't like actually to make this a wider proposition if he perceived us as strong. Now
Well,
he perceives us as weak, so the likelihood that he will indeed widen the war increases that way.
No, it does. I should point out, I'm seeing some people saying you're wrong, guys. I don't actually believe what I said there. It's a question for the sake
We
of
can't sit here. We
instead
need to
of
have a debate.
that's what a good interviewer does. You ask questions which
Yeah, exactly.
I know I personally know the legalities of it. Like, I mean, you can see this, for example, right? Despite Putin's disregard of international law, he still believes it to such an extent that he doesn't go to countries which could arrest him under the ICC warrant that he has out against him. Much the same as Benjamin Netanyahu. So, I mean, we had a very reputable chap called Kenneth Roth on. He was the executive director of Human Rights Watch for many years. A fantastic chat about international law. So, yeah, I know the distinction, guys. I don't actually believe what I'm saying. No way. I just really want to clarify that. Anyway,
and I'm not a law expert by no stretch of the imagination.
No, I mean, working in the UN for the years that I did, you quickly become appreciative of how much, despite what countries that go on about the end of the United Nations or the end of the US order, a lot of them actually leverage the United Nations, especially the Security Council, for their own gain. Like the Chinese, I think the best example of this. They actually really value the UN because it helps facilitate their rise as a legitimate alternative to the US. As Trump's going across places, invading this, attacking that, etc. Chinese are just sort of sitting there being like, well, we're respecting international law and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the UN Geneva UN Charter. And countries are like, yeah, you are. So, yeah. Anyway, perception is everything, right?
It's the same with Iran. I see a lot of people saying, "Well, but this around the Strait of Hormuz, why do we let the Iranians do it?" Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. But the trouble is that it wasn't Iran that started this war. And that is why the Iranians will always come back and say, "This is self-defense. We have to do this because we were attacked, and we have to prevent the U.S. from sending their navy ships into the Gulf because we were attacked, and we have to prevent U.S. presence in the Gulf states because we've been continuously being attacked from those states." And when these the Iranian regime is a terrorist regime, but when you have to acknowledge that they are saying something that is not just a fraud, it's terrible because but Trump started this war, so he's handing them arguments they should have never had.
So the other thing I wanted to do a little bit with you, Jacob, is a little bit on the battlefield, both inside Russia with what I titled this stream with you about. Is now Russia's lost 80% of its wild berries, or what the West is calling Russia's Amazon. But also the territorial movement, it's really slowed down by the looks of it. Russia's net gain has dropped to what, about, I think I saw in one report from the Institute of the Study of War, about 13 square miles over the past month, which is insane. It was down from about 30 the month before that. So could you take us through a little bit of what you've seen on the actual battlefront?
Yeah, and actually Ukraine have pushed the Russians a little back here and there, and I think last month actually some recordings showed that Ukraine had actually gained territory, but it is still, that is not the big difference. The main impact is not pushing a few kilometers forward here and there and losing elsewhere. The deep strikes and the mid-range strikes by the Ukrainians is what is significant. What they call the logistical lockdown of Crimea is super important, and is having effects in Crimea and possibly also in the western part of the front line in Kherson and Zaporizhia province. So those are very important to keep an eye on. And then also from the Russian side, it's super important not to lose sight of the fact that they're pushing closer slightly to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. and also with their increased drone capabilities and increasing use of glide bombs into Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, are gradually, making life there impossible. Actually, last week there was a very good documentary on Kiev Independent from Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. I would urge all our viewers here to go and just check it out. It was by Kiev Independent, Francis Farrell, the journalist, last week, to get a sense of a reality check, really, of what life is like in Ukrainian Donbass. But there the Russians clearly are still pushing, and it's very hard to measure, because then they send in a squad to plant a flag somewhere in something they've not conquered at all, and we see that happening all the time. Yeah, you got it there,
Yeah.
exactly.
So this is the Institute of the Study of Wars update as of 1:30 yesterday. Yeah, so what you were saying, I can't find one that's more detailed on the exact lines for the two, but I guess that sort of leads me to my question, really, or subsequent question, Jacob, which is sort of, there's a lot of emphasis on the fortress belt, on the fortress cities, as
Yeah.
the sort of the final line. Putin's putting all of his emphasis on trying to get Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts as a way to at least therefore say that he's got a win, and then he can begin to claim to his to the Russian population that the war has been won. He can find an off ramp. Essentially, is that what you think, or do you think that they're after more?
Yeah, I
Of course,
mean,
you think that's what he's trying.
one thing I will say is highly unlikely is that he will, if he succeeded, and that is a big if. I don't think he will succeed. I don't see that as the most likely option. But if he did succeed, he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop recruiting soldiers. He's now. It looks like he'll start a rather large mobilization, and he won't stop arming Russia. And this whole war footing that he has put the country on. It's one thing to put the country and the economy on a war footing, and it's an entirely different prospect to roll it back. And I don't think Putin will be able to roll it back. And that means if the war actually freezes in Ukraine, the whole mobilization and the whole arming of Russia continues. It's upward trend. You see, if the Ukrainians don't kill or at least take 30 to 35,000 Russian soldiers off the battlefield each month, that gives you an indication how quickly the force will swell. And the same with with all their ammo and all the stuff they produce for the war. So that would be a huge problem. Widely in Ukraine, for Putin to restart the war when he's ready, or potentially wider in Europe. So I don't really think he's looking for an off ramp. He might be looking for a pause at some stage, but I don't think it'll get to that point. I think the Ukrainians will be able to withstand it. Of course, they're very dependent on Europe, but there's a lot of funding flowing into Ukraine from the European Union as we speak, and that will also swell the Ukrainian defense industry. So they do become stronger and stronger also.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a time lag effect. Whichever way around it is, I can't remember which way around it is. There's a bit of delay between the Europeans committing the significant billions that they have done now in various rounds since the start of the year, to seeing that materialize through physical assets on the ground.
Mind you, the Ukrainians are not bureaucratic like the rest of us. They, there's a quick, from flash to bang. It's pretty quick. And I mean, I think was it something like 9 billion that was dispersed in June from the European Union. The first tranche of the big loan package.
Oh yes, yeah.
I believe it was 9 billion. Of course, it does, but again, the Ukrainian, especially drone and what do you call unmanned systems were already on the increase, and that is a huge shot in the arm for the Ukrainian industry. So I think that they'll be quick. I've been working a bit with the Ukrainian defense industry, and they mean business. It's they depend on it for their lives, so they are really efficient.
No, I think that's a complicated one. I think because a lot of Ukrainians have been frustrated by the corruption at the sort of mid-officer level that's occurred within the army over the past couple of years. I mean, Ukraine remains quite a corrupt country. Russia still.
Yeah.
The remnants of the Cold War. I mean, I think we should be brave enough to say that. So I think it's important for the European Union to take the due diligence and steps to make sure it reaches the correct channels.
I will say, now Denmark, my own country, was the first mover in terms of working with the Ukrainian defense industry. And since then, a number of other countries came in, and especially over the last year, and have really been, important in building up this capacity. And there have been good checks on this way of support. That's what I know from Ukraine, both in terms of who actually gets the funding, because the Ukrainians also dependent on giving this funding to to companies that can actually do stuff that works at the front line, because otherwise it's a big security problem in Ukraine. So all that we know for now is that this has been, I can't say that every penny has gone to the right place, but we haven't had any corruption issues with this way of support so far. That's what I can say. It might happen. I can't guarantee, but we haven't seen it so far, and there are good mechanisms actually to control it.
No, for sure. I mean, I think it's inevitable. A little bit of it will happen. You have siphoning of the funds in any large-scale provision of funds. I mean, look at what happened with the Afghan. But don't worry, I'm not saying the Ukrainian army is like the Afghan army, but ghost soldiers, as they're known, right? You suddenly draw up all these directories of soldiers who don't exist, or all these pieces of equipment that have gone missing.
But I think the Ukrainians are a bit more motivated than
no, for sure they are. Of course they are. I'm just saying there can be examples of that in any figure of war.
Yeah.
But no, I think that more to the point, the Europeans are really stepping up the funding that is happening for Ukraine, and this is going to have more of I think we'll see more of the impacts of this over the next few months, probably by the middle of the fall, I would say. And certainly that's going to come in the same timing with when Putin has to consider this mobilization decision, because as I said, I think at the beginning of our stream last week, right, Putin faces between a rock and a hard place. Either he doesn't mobilize, and so he struggles on the front lines, or he does mobilize, but then that's an admittance that the war is not going well. We've got this 30,000 North Korean troops that are supposedly coming, which I think shows you just how desperate it is getting, that you have to support, you have to deviate to Pyongyang for your quality troop members instead of the Spetsnaz or something like that. So it's
the famous VDV.
Yeah, yeah. I guess sort of to end it really, I mean, Jacob, the last couple things I'm curious about is how much do you think that this impacts the Russian psyche as well from a military standpoint? Because more and more Russian civilians are being killed now. They're getting more and more a sense of what Ukrainians have been going through for 4 or 5 years at this point. The war is coming home. And on top of that, as I think I said last week as well, is that the war economy is now propping up the civilian economy. And so if you're taking out these production facilities, which are the bedrock of your supply chains to military equipment and stuff, what's that going to do elsewhere to the economy and stuff, right? I'm just curious what your thoughts on that.
No, precisely. I mean, that's the last point is what I meant is it's going to be hard to roll it back. So Putin is in a trap like that. And I think, for it has an impact also with all the gas shortages we see in Russia, and the Ukrainian effort to really hit not only wild berries but also the refineries is continuing. So I think there is much more of an impact than what we've seen so far, and it's going to have some effect. I'm not saying that it will mean suddenly Putin will be gone. I think his grip on power is still very, very solid, but a lot depends on, can the Ukraine make this what I call the logistical lockdown of the western part of the front and Crimea. Can they really wrestle Putin's grip on Crimea and make that uncertain and disturb it even more? That could also change a lot inside of Russia. So all these things combined, let's see. When we might have a clearer picture in 3 or 4 months of this. I'm cautious, but still, it's going to have an impact. That is for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things we get excited when we read the headlines. Obviously, it takes people like us to come and deliver the truth and help break it down, right? But no, but in the sense of
I certainly hadn't foreseen that the Ukrainians would be able to reduce the Russian refinery capacity by 40 to 45% this spring. That is really what they've done. And the reason why they've been able to do it is because they've been very good at targeting Russian air defense, meaning, air defense asset for Russians is not just something you replace. And so Russia is much more exposed. And that is why I'm saying this won't stop from the Ukrainian side. We also see more long-range strike capabilities come online in Ukraine, and more of that will occur this fall. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as I was just saying, I think you can read a headline and you get super excited, being like, "Oh my god, sea change, game changer." It always takes a little bit longer for that to be reached, but certainly to the point, like it makes me think of last year when we had Operation Spiderweb, when all those drones blew up in the lorries and stuff, and that was like the one major sabotage under the nose of the Kremlin's attack of the year. Now it's just on a daily basis, like, oh, another facility's blown sky high.
Yeah.
The rate of change that we've seen in only just a year, which the year beyond that was super amazing because everyone was like, oh my God, Ukraine's managed to do this clandestine covert operation into Russian interior. And now it's just a mere occurrence and we're barely, it's funny how human nature, we become so normalized to stuff, right? 4 years ago, people would be like, oh my God, Ukraine's doing this. And it's like, yeah, of course they're doing it. They got the drones, they got the innovation, they got, yes. So it's crazy, the trajectory which things have changed as well. But
Exactly.
Anything to shout out before we wrap up? Anything you've got coming up for people to look out for?
Yeah, I will. On Thursday night, I'll do an event for paid subscribers on Substack on the Leipzig attack, and also more on air defense. Why it's super troublesome in Ukraine, and why both we're in deep trouble in the US and Europe in terms of our capacity to actually manufacture air defense missiles. And that is a huge impact on Ukraine and potentially also in Europe, because in Europe, I've just put out one little figure here. In Europe right now, we are only able to produce air defense missiles to shoot down 3 to 4% of the ballistic missiles that Russia can produce every year. So if you look at the Russian capacity to produce ballistic missiles, we produce long-range air defense missiles to only shoot down 3 to 4% of those ballistic missiles.
Yeah,
that is a problem. That is a huge problem.
Well, I think, as terrifying as that is, I think it still serves to consider the economic sustainability of that, because the Russians' capacity to produce those depends on the economy functioning. And if the wartime and civilian economies are dead, then that severely undermines it, which is why, back to this multifaceted strategy you talked about, sanctions. Yeah, I think that can be. But interesting. I'm also very worried about the sustainability of America's interceptive missiles on Iran. That's what
Exactly. And if you look at the capacity of the US to rebuild its stockpile, it's not exactly impressive.
No, it isn't. But that's something I'm going to be covering actually later, is this trilateral or trifecta relationship, the US, Russia, Chinese thing. And we've got Peter Zion coming on the show at the end of the week, actually, quite a well-known
okay, cool.
strategist. Yeah. So keep a lookout for that, everyone. But otherwise, thank you, Jacob, always so much for your time. It's a pleasure doing this. Everyone, do subscribe to us if you haven't already. And, enjoy your week and, stay safe out there. But, we'll see you next week. Have a good one, everyone.
See ya.